for coming back. You in the house of analyst, Mr.
Mhm.
Umbrella. Four
Thank you for
times
inviting thank you for
four
inviting
times
me.
Olympics runner.
Yes.
Right. So yeah. First of all, I want to welcome you first, and then just to ask you how you doing, my brother. I know it's a lot right now to go through.
Yeah, I think the world's kind of spinning on its axis right now in a way that's kind of wobbly, but I think as long as we try to take a day at a time, a second at a time, really, we can kind of get through this. But between earthquakes and pandemics and variants, and whether or not kids are going to go to school or mass, and then you have the upcoming September 11th, 20th anniversary. There's a lot to handle. Hopefully, the resilience of the American spirit and the fiber of the world will be able to get through this.
Absolutely, absolutely. So here's what we're gonna do. I know there's three important topics that we I will help. I will want for you to help me debunk. But first, let's start with the Olympics. I know this is almost a conclusion, and we cannot have a conversation here without talking about sports. You are being a professional athlete. Tell us a little bit what's new? What do you have as news when it comes to the Olympics? We discussed on this show many times about mental issues and what was going on around it. The athletes coming up to talk about the issues like Simone Biles and all kind of stuff. So, what do you have learned so far when it comes to Olympics and athletes in general?
Well, I think this Olympics was obviously one for the ages, historical. Many athletes trained, not sure whether or not they're actually going to be able to compete. I think that when the history books are written about this Olympic Games, it's going to be one in which folks will say, first of all, how do they pull it off? And more importantly, how do the athletes stay fit mentally and physically? I applaud Simone Biles. I applaud the other athletes who confronted some mental health challenges and probably had some other challenges in other arenas that we weren't aware of and may come to light at some time in the future. But I'm optimistic that the IOC, the United States Olympic Committee, and other National Olympic Organizing Committee people have learned a lot and learned how to kind of conduct the Olympic Games on the fly. There's no recipe, no cookbook. There's been no precedent. And so I'm proud of the fact that they were able to pull it off. And I applaud the Japanese, the athletes, and the spirit of the Olympic Games was definitely on high alert in more ways than one in Tokyo.
Yeah. So, what have we learned from this experience, especially particularly on this 21 Olympics in Japan? Anything that we learned?
I think that mental health components are very, very important among athletes. There have been a number of, unfortunately, recently a young man in Houston, Cameron Burrell. We found out later that he recently took his life, and his father, Leroy Burrell, who's a great athlete and someone who I've known for a number of years, he's his son, and so it's very moving, very touching, and very actually devastating, to be honest. And that you had a young man who, for whatever reason, in one moment, maybe because of things known only to him, and decided to take his own life. And my thoughts and prayers go with Roy and Michelle Burrell, all the loved ones, to Carl Lewis, who was his godfather and someone who I've known since 1984, and to all those around the world from Africa, Asia, and America who were touched by the loss of this young man, and other people who have similarly decided that the pain was too much to bear. And so I plead with collegiate athletic directors. I plead with professional teams to allow your folks to talk about what they're going through. Suffering in silence is a terrible thing. And once you're gone, you don't come back. There is no Lazarus scenario here. Once you're gone, you're gone. And I hope that something can be learned. And it's unfortunate that Cameron, and may God bless his soul wherever it is. I hope that we will be able to learn something from this event and minimize these kind of talented young people who have so much to contribute to humanity deciding to take their own lives by their own hand in the midst of all the other things that we have to, as people of color, racial profiling, police brutality, all that. So my heart goes out, and Leroy and Michelle, I'm here for you if you need me for anything.
Absolutely. But one of the things that I noticed that your country, ever since, I mean, after you represented that country 4 times, it looks like after you, we don't see much other athlete going to represent Equatorial Guinea. Well, what about this year? Any news from anybody that represented your country at the highest level?
Yeah, there was actually. There's a gentleman who I'd heard of who was a middle distance runner, but sometimes what happens, Malik, is that you get these smaller countries who are often supported by the International Olympic Committee funding, who will have more officials than athletes. So you'll see a parade of, let's say, a delegation of 10 people, 7 are officials. Now, if one of these officials who look pretty healthy and looks as if they've eaten pretty well over the course of their lives is ready to suit up and either swim, jump, or run, I'd applaud them. But if they're there just to check out the latest cuisine at the Olympic Village and to shop, well, I think it's best done in Malabo, in Sipopo, Oyala, or maybe in your hometown of Libreville.
Absolutely, absolutely. So as far as the political issues in the Equatorial Guinea, sports is always something to start with, but we know that there's still some political issues, and we know that you for last
30
decades.
years. 30 years, 1990.
The last 30 years. No, I was just trying to talk about ever since I've been knowing you, man. You've been an advocate for the people of the Equatorial Guinea. As a matter of fact, some people will say self-proclaim proclaim a president of Equatorial Guinea. Why you putting yourself in that position? Why you call yourself the president or maybe the next president of Equatorial Guinea?
Well, that's a new rumor that I've heard. I've heard a lot of things. I know that I'm president of the Federation for Democracy and Justice in the Republic of Equatorial Guinea. That's a fact. No one in Equatorial Guinea can be duly elected or named president until the will of the people has been expressed. And no time during the time of Teodoro Obiang or his uncle have there been free, fair, and transparent elections. I'm hoping that this go around, that free, fair, open, and safe elections will be allowed by all individuals, all party members, everyone who has a platform. I hope we'll have the opportunity to have it on full display. I make no bones about the fact that I believe that my vision, I believe that my desire, my duality of understanding both the U.S. and Africa puts me in a position to be among one of many qualified candidates, but I don't count any of the chickens before they come home to roost.
Absolutely. Listen, what we're gonna do is just to change gears. We're gonna go to of course, that we just start on international politics, and for doing so, we're gonna bring another deep thinker, another friend of mine, Mr. Paul Pomfrey, who is amazing when it comes to international politics. He's gonna join us. Particularly also to give us his idea about what's going on in Haiti, and that will be in the next few minutes. All right, so we are joined by our friend Paul Pomfrey. I think somebody have something. If you can turn down your electronics so that we can better listen to what's going on. How you doing, my friend? Exactly. I see that you're trying to adjust yourself. Welcome to the show, Paul. It's always a pleasure to have you. You have with you our brother Gustavo Mbella, and somebody who's always been here. We've been missing you, Paul, and I've been telling you that you need to come back because this is the place where you don't have the news to be filtered. This is we give it to you here raw. That's why I have to bring both of you gentlemen, because I know your intellect and your capacity to debunk some of the issues that are going on around the world. Welcome, my friend. First of all, welcome to the show again. Welcome back.
Happy to be back. Happy to be back.
How you been doing, man?
Staying a little busy, staying just a little bit busy, but the struggle continues.
Absolutely. The struggle continues. Talking about the struggle, Paul, what's going on in Haiti? It looks like it's a never ending suffering in that part of the world. And it's just a couple of, some miles from Florida. What's going on with that part of the world?
Well, for those who may be familiar with what's going on in Africa, Haiti very much reminds me of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. One, Haiti is a very rich country. It has a number of minerals. It sits on a number of continental plates, and that's what leads it to having earthquakes as it's been having now. This is the second one within 12 years, 11 years, and it has attracted the interest of a number of U.S. businesses who seem to want to take full advantage of its resources the same way they're doing it in the Congo. And of course, when a country gets robbed, as they do in the Congo, as they do in Haiti, the way the media often describes the country is that the country is poor. But the way I would describe it is if someone steals your wallet, the reason why you don't have money is not because you're poor, but because someone stole your wallet.
But I respect your opinion on that. I just wanted to talk about the recent development. We know recently, and you and me we spoke on the phone. The death of President of Haiti, Mr. Moise. Yeah, Moise passed away. He was assassinated. It's known for everybody. Before we even finished to find out what happened, we have a 7.2 earthquake, and never-ending suffering. And I know, Haiti, like you just said, it's not a poor country, but when can this suffering just go away? I mean, what can people possibly do to kind of bring some kind of to ease a little bit the situation in Haiti at this point?
I think one of the things that people here in the United States should be insisting on the fact that the United States does not send its military into Haiti right now. Because in fact, when the U.S. military goes into another country, it's rarely there to serve the interests of that country, but to serve the interests of the president and the U.S. government. And I see that as a major conflict of interest when it comes down to dealing with the future of Haiti. And so one thing is that as people who are citizens here in the United States, we should be very, very clear and insist that the U.S. does not send its military into Haiti. The last time they had an earthquake there, the doctors who were doing the lion's share of work and helping the people who were victims of the earthquake were Cuban doctors. And when President Obama sent trains in there, the Cuban doctors had to physically leave Port-au-Prince, where the earthquake had taken place, and go out to the countryside, which meant that for people who had been injured, who had bones broken and had major injuries, they had to then be transported on very rough roads out to the countryside so that the Cuban doctors could treat them. And this is something that the media chose not to talk about. But as people know a little bit about what happened in the years of Grenada, when the U.S. invaded Grenada, something similar happened to that, where there was a conflict between the Cubans who were building an airport in Grenada at the time, and the U.S. Marine Corps who landed there. And in fact, to not have that happen again, the Cubans just left the area where the U.S. Marines were located. Well, that made it much more difficult for the people who were hurt in the earthquake, because now they got to bounce on roads that aren't in very good shape and travel sometimes as much as 30, 40, 50 to 70 miles to get treatment.
Absolutely.
That's the first step. The second thing is that when we look at what happened with the president, Maurice, who just was killed, there are a few things to look at. One, when he was in an election in Haiti, there were 6 million people, Haitians, who voted. He only received a little bit more than 500,000 votes. But yet the United States insisted that he won the election. The second problem was under the Constitution, the Haitian Constitution, his term was to end on February the 7th of this year. But on February the 6th, he announced he wanted to stay another year in office. Now, what he had done prior to that was, under the Constitution, if he had not held elections, the head of the Supreme Court was supposed to step in as temporary head of state until he organized a new election for a new president. But instead, President Maurice fired not only the Chief Justice, but a number of other justices on the Supreme Court. He also refused to hold the midterm elections, and so the deputies who had been elected the same time he was elected, term was ended after 2 years, and his term was supposed to be there for 5 years. And because he came in a year late, it was shortened to 4 years. But he didn't hold the midterm elections, so the deputies were dismissed from the National Assembly.
So are you saying that those are the causes, or you, whatever you explain? I come to you, Gustavo. So everything you're explaining right now, you think this is a part of the reason why he get assassinated?
Well, yes. Well, what you have, as you will find even in many places in Africa, is that you have many different players.
We're gonna come to that. I'm gonna
talk about why he got assassinated. You have many players inside of Haiti bidding to take advantage, economic advantage of Haiti. You have the international businesses and factories that are in economic enterprise zones who do not pay taxes to manufacture products inside of Haiti. Then you have the national bourgeoisie of Haiti who also have factories but also have to pay taxes. And there's often a conflict between the national bourgeoisie and the international bourgeoisie as to who gets the attention of the president of the country. And so when one feels that the other one has been slighted, when they felt that they've been slighted, they didn't take offense with the president themselves. And so the question really is whether or not, in fact, the international interest was the ones that decided that he needed to be taken out, or whether or not the national business interest felt that he needed to be taken out. But clearly, the typical Haitian could not afford to hire people from Colombia to come into Haiti and take out their president. Secondly, he had 3 different sets of security people. He had people at the entrance gate to his property, in which those Colombians were allowed to come past. No one got shot. It wasn't like they fought their way past them. They came past them without getting shot. There were people outside of his house that were supposed to be protecting the immediate perimeter of his house. The Colombians got past them. No gunshots were happening. And then there were people inside of his house there to protect him. And again, the only kind of time there was gunshots was when they shot at the president. So one has to ask, was this an inside job?
That's a good question, though. If this is an inside job, and I'm going to come back to Mr. Gustavo Mvela. There's a lot of development, a lot of analysis that Brother Paul has always just give us, and part of it is to try and explain to us that in these days and age, you cannot longer trying to stick in power for so long because a lot of stuff can happen. The situation, the political situation in Equatorial Guinea, and before even brother Paul come on the show, you and me we have a chance to speak about the situation in Haiti. And you were trying to make some kind of connection with a situation in Equatorial Guinea. Please, can you kind of tie up those two situations and give us your opinion when it comes to Haiti, but also Equatorial Guinea?
And first of all, I appreciate and I respect Paul's perspective. It's always nice to find individuals who are fact-based and not rumor-based. That being said, with regard to Equatorial Guinea and other African countries, this is an old, stale playbook of clinging on to power by changing either a bicameral legislative election or firing people at the last day or amending the Constitution. The 21st century leaders, of which I include myself and others, are not going to play this game anymore. You're either going to leave when you said you're going to leave, or they'll be taking extra, we'll just say extra measures to assure that you are no longer a valid candidate. Unfortunately, most of these leaders, whether in Haiti, Equatorial Guinea, or other African countries, and let's not forget some of the folks out in the Belarus and other areas, they think that they have all the intellectual capacity, all the knowledge, as if there's no one else, no other people out there who are thirsting to contribute in a meaningful way to their country. And so it's farcical, it's gross, and for me, it's almost an indication that these folks have no idea that they're living in an alternate universe in which they're trying to swim in dollar bills, either laced in oil or covered in diamonds.
Absolutely, absolutely, Paul. I don't know if you have to add something, from what Brother Gustavo just said. I mean, the issue of Haiti looks like there's some kind of a similarity with what's going on the continent of Africa. What's your thought?
You will find that not just in Africa, you will find it throughout the third world. That, in fact, international businesses believe they have the right to come to someone else's country and take control over their natural resources. And if a politician gets in their way, they feel they have the right to remove that politician. I mean, what are you looking at when Patrice Lumumba became first elected prime minister of the Congo? And in fact, Belgium and the United States decided they didn't want to use some of the wealth from the Congo to develop the Congo. They wanted to keep things as it was under the Belgians, where they basically got all the major advantages of the wealth of the Congo, and the Congolese people still said they're living in abject poverty because the European and U.S. corporations were robbing the living daylights out of the country. It's high time that we, as people of African descent, should say no more. That this should no longer happen. Maybe you did it back in the days when there weren't electronics where people could communicate with other people in other parts of the world and had to depend only on the mass media to tell them what was going on. But in today's world, people have WhatsApp, they have the phone company, they have many ways of communicating and understanding what is going on the ground in these countries. And that we should say no more. The US or Europe or anybody else should have the right to just come in and just totally rob these countries and then tell the world that these countries don't have resources because they're poor, when in fact they have plenty of resources. It's just that they're not allowed to have access to their own resources.
And I don't subscribe to the whole resource curse. When they talk about the resource curse, I think it's a lack of good governance curse. You have individuals, you have multinational corporations who come in, and their claim, and I know Paul knows as well, is that they don't want to interfere with the internal politics of a country. How can you say that when you're digging diamonds? You're literally in the internal affairs of a country. And so that kind of nomenclature is outdated, and it needs to be corrected. And the multinational corporations, and we have to be very honest, but for the multinational corporations coming into countries like Equatorial Guinea and finding oil in other areas, the country could be not in the state it is right now. However, it's not as if individuals from the country can't be trained as to technical expertise. These guys come in and say, well, we're going to bring in our people. We don't want to have the local population be educated on how to work on the technical component. Come on now. Look at the history of Africa and the continent. Long before ExxonMobil was around.
Gustavo, I want us to talk a little bit about the aid, because for a long time, it looks like anytime when it comes to help a country in Africa, instead of just helping the infrastructure, helping the people to develop themselves, usually there's this politics and the policies of aid. Last time we noticed that the last earthquake, it looks like the Red Cross mishandled the money in Haiti, and they even recognized that there was a mismanagement of the money when it comes to really bring some kind of development instead of just put a band-aid, because what people do is they take the money and then mismanage this. Paul, I think you have something to add on that.
Well, one of the things we need to be clear about when you look at organizations like the Red Cross, look at their board, look who's on their board, look whose other boards these same members of their boards are on. And then you see a bit of a conflict of interest, because in fact, they use these nonprofits as a means to drum up business for the for-profit boards, companies that they're involved with. And what you begin to see is a real conflict of interest where, in fact, the money is being spent, but it's really benefiting mostly people and corporations in the U.S., and very little of it is used to benefit the people in country. I'll give you a good example. I remember back in 2010, I was watching 60 Minutes, and they were showing there's a major street in Port-au-Prince called Delmar. Delmar runs up from 1 all the way up to like 110, 120. Each one of those are numbers. It represents a street. Well, there was an announcement made in Haiti for people who had family members who had passed away during the earthquake because of the heat, bring their bodies and place the bodies on Delmar, and that they will pick up the bodies and bury the bodies. While I'm watching in horror at 60 Minutes, I'm watching a 4-wheel front-end loader scooping up bodies off the paved street and dumping the bodies onto a truck to be taken somewhere to be buried. Now, one can assume that whoever got that contract for that front-end loader probably were making well over $100 an hour. Plus, as far as the person operating it, it was probably another $30, $50 an hour. At that time, the typical wage of a Haitian worker was less than $5 a day. So if they had taken 20 Haitians where they could have respectfully picked up the bodies who had passed away and placed those bodies on the truck with dignity, rather than have a loader with blades that could cut off a person's hand or arm or something as it's scooping up the person's body. It would have been much cheaper, but it would also allow those people who did that work to have some money to take back home to their families. Because of the earthquake, many of those people had no jobs. And so it would have brought dignity to at least 40 people, rather than bring a large profit to one company that was doing the job that really shouldn't have been done with the equipment they were using. That's just one good example of how, when they claim they're giving assistance to another country that's had a disaster, that they look for how to put money into the rich people's pockets. rather than look at ways of how they could get things accomplished in a much more humane and a much more efficient way. And it wouldn't even cost as much. And
When
so
I, yeah.
what you end up finding is,
Jump,
yes,
jump in on that thought, Gustavo. What you think that the aid kind of a economical as a system? I'm not gonna use system, but do you think this aid thing works? Because for a long time, since the '60s, most countries in Africa, we're always talking about AIDS, the IMF, the World Bank. Do you think this works at this point?
Well, as Paul and you both know, Malik, most the World Bank and the IMF, they come with so many red tape restrictions, right? You have benchmarks you have to meet, and then once hopefully that benchmark is met, then that comes with other kind of responsibilities, and it's a shell game. But when the theme in hearing Paul recount his tragic story of the Haitian life, what really resonated with me is how even in death, the lives of Black people aren't given any kind of countenance. And in life, we struggle, and in death, we're not even given dignity. And so I know that Mr. Paul has probably a few more years of wisdom with me, and I hope that our generation will listen to his generation for guidance. For those of us who understand the wisdom of elders, people will have the benefit of being where we are now, but being where they are. We would be foolhardy to not listen 3 times and speak once when the people like Paul and others are on board. So I salute you for your hard work, for your dedication to speaking truth to power, and realizing that these multinationals are nothing more than 21st century corporate robber barons, plain and simple.
that's true. It's very true. And in fact, we see it happening over and over and over again. And until we as a collective body speak up loudly and say enough is enough, because when they started the IMF and the World Bank, it was right after World War World War II. And it was designed to rebuild Europe. And the way they functioned as an organization in rebuilding Europe was totally different than the way they function today within what is known as the Third World. They actually help those countries generate jobs.
But why we Paul? I'm not cutting you off. Why after the Second World War we have the Marshall Plan, as you already know. There was a Marshall Plan to rebuild Europe. But why we never have some kind of Marshall Plan, knowing that the Africa been devastating, so years of slavery and then devastating with a colonization. Why can we have some kind of Marshall Plan, just like Europe got after the Second World War?
Well, when you look at what happened after the World War II, you begin to understand that was a fight amongst a family of thieves. Those who were robbing Africa, those who were robbing Asia, those who were robbing South America, Central America, and the Caribbean. And after the war was over, they became a family again. And the first thing they needed to do was rebuild what they had torn apart. And in that process, they recognized that they could no longer keep their military occupying India, Pakistan, different parts of Africa, different parts of the Caribbean, different parts of what we know as the Third World today. So when they brought them back home to rebuild Europe, they had to set up a new type of relationship. And so what they did was they gave what was looked at as political, quote unquote, political autonomy to these former colonial states, while they kept control over the economic of those states. Because the whole idea of colonialism was to use the colonial states to create an economic base for Europe, for the United States, for the European countries, for Canada. And so what you have was these countries set up a system. For example, one of the things the French did was they took people out of Lebanon and out of Syria and placed them in the former African states that they were controlling. Now, why was this? Because they knew they still wanted to do business in those states, and they didn't want to do business with the locals in those states. And so if they brought a minority community into those states and did business with that minority community, it's not surprising that when you go to the former French colonies of Africa, you will find Lebanese, you will find Syrians, and people of other parts of the Middle East. When you go into the former British, you will find a number of Asians, business people who run the banks, who run the businesses in those states. And they're the go-between people. And their whole idea is to be the ones on the ground, to follow the money back to Europe, back to Canada, Australia, and the United States.
So
even when you go to Haiti today.
I'll come back to you, Mr. Paul. Let me ask Gustavo this, because I want to stick on that question that I asked first. Those international institutions, the IMF, the World Bank, you see somebody like the president of Ghana saying, no, enough is enough. I'm going to have to do this myself because I never see a country that been developed with the aid.
Yeah, exactly.
You know?
And even Equatorial Guinea, you know that there's a $250 million IMF loan that's been in the bands. They've been going back and forth, back and forth. First, they're going to grant it. And that Equatorial Guinea was ravaged by the external shocks of the pandemic, the uncertainty with oil. And right now, they're kind of going back to the old tin can routine. And so, where that is in terms of begging for money. And it's unfortunate that the IMF and folks who, as Paul mentioned, it is kind of a colonial mentality. But we also have to realize too, that we live in a multipolar, interdependent world. But I think that the African states, all 54 of them, can work in a more cohesive manner. We have folks who went to Harvard Business School, Stanford, all the other, and you don't have to be the Ivy League guys. These are basic principles of financial literacy. And I think that when you put people who are capable in positions of authority to shepherd these heads of state, you're going to find a lot of outcomes differently. Let's not be fooled. A lot of people who are in power in the 70s and 80s and 90s were people who were purposely put there by others because they knew these folks weren't the brightest bulbs. They loved to be able to put people in positions that they knew that with sideways politically, that particular leader was going to fall. In most states, there are a bunch of hidden hands, but many of these hands have changed with new generation.
So, Paul, let me ask you this, Paul. Do you think at this point in time, should Africa stop taking aid from the World Bank and IMF? That's as the final question, and then we're gonna move to something else. Unless you, and then I would like some kind of conclusion on Haiti because of the repeated. It's too much earthquake, and I want to have some kind of conclusion on both of you.
Well, on the issue of aid, let's be clear. The part in which the money that they provide aid to Africa, I mean, let's look at where that money came from. You look at the diamonds that are in Europe today, that they didn't come from Europe, they came from Africa. When you look at the electronic industry today, when you look at the coltan and the cobalt and the uranium, all these products are raw materials coming out of Africa. So basically, they're taking the raw materials out of Africa at a very below market price, refining that raw material, selling it on the international market, and then loaning the money they made off of that raw material back to the same countries that they stole it from. This is how you find what's going on right now in the Congo, what you find is going on in South Africa, what you find is going on in Zimbabwe. You find it happening all over the continent of Africa and all over the third world. where these mining companies, mainly from places like Canada and places like Australia.
But should we stop? Should Africa? I want you to look at the camera and say what you think about this aid from the IMF and the World Bank. Should we continue to take money from those institutions?
I think the rules need to be changed. I think first thing is it's those countries' money in the first place. That's the point I was just trying to make. It's it's their raw materials that generates the money that ends up in the World Bank and the IMF.
Okay, I want a straight answer from Mr. Mbada.
Let me say one other important.
Okay, go very quick.
Yeah, we just went through a pandemic where we had the highest unemployment since the Depression. Yet the stock market in the United States was going through the roof. How do you explain that? And so many people weren't working. How does the company still make so much money? And when we can begin to start looking at how that happened, I think we can begin to start seeing solutions of how we can solve these problems.
I'll give you a direct answer. I believe that you should try to capitalize upon as many revenue streams as possible, but never play the role of step and fetch it where you're begging off of crumbs. If you can create your own wealth internally, go about do it. But we're not here looking to be the 21st century Kunta Kintes. Africans are very capable of taking care of ourselves, and if given the opportunity without outside obstruction, I'm confident that my generation of leaders building upon the shoulders of the Paul will be just fine. Africa was around before, and Africa will continue to go on long after we're gone.
Well said. Listen, guys, we can stay here all night, especially when you have the broadest mind on this show, giving their point of view. What we're gonna be doing is also change gears again and just go toward what's going on right now. The America, the Afghanistan. That's the hot topic right now. So we're gonna change gear and go to that and trying to listen to those two gentlemen. And I have to remind you, you are on Talk to Me. This is Global Affairs Network, Gain Show, and you have Mr. Paul Pomfrey and this Gustavo Mbala. One of the greatest gentlemen, one of those greatest gentlemen in our communities. So we will be right back after this very short pause, and we're gonna dive right into the situation in Afghanistan. All right, welcome back again. Like I tell you before, this is again TV. The show is Talk to Me. So I have these two gentlemen, Paul Pomfrey, Gustavo Mbala, to help me debunk what's going on in Afghanistan. Those imagery that we see right now is so sad. When you see that C-17 running on the tarmac and people desperately trying to get into it so that they can flee Afghanistan. I'm going to start with you, Mr. Gustavo Mbala. Those imagery that we see you coming from Afghanistan. Do you think this is a failure in intelligence in the United States when it comes to Afghanistan-U.S. relationship?
I think this situation unraveled so much more quickly than people anticipated. Anytime you invest 20 years of blood, treasure, human intelligence, signal intelligence in the people, hoping that they could one day become self-serving, self-sustaining, and to see it almost collapse like a paper canoe out in the middle of a river was amazing to me. And those images of people fleeing the airport. It's like Saigon when they're trying to avoid, Vietnam. It was so, and it's particularly poignant as we are nearing September 11th and all that transpired during that terrible day 20 years ago. I hope that President Biden and those around him realize that he didn't bear all the responsibility, but he's in the big chair now. He's the decision maker. We can't talk about what happened before. We only can talk about the present. We've had a history of presidents, even the one before us, before Mr. Biden, who would always try to lay blame. I think if you tell people, listen, we made a mistake, we're going to try to correct it and not use it as a political game. These are human lives, people who are the women, the children who want to get educated, and the Taliban, who are, it's almost like what happened on January 6th in many ways, right?
Absolutely.
Came
I'm
in,
gonna pose. I'm gonna pose that same question. I want a straight answer right now because the world are watching. You know, you didn't come to on this show for just so you know. People all really want to hear some answers. Same question to you, Mister Paul, my friend and brother. Do you think this is a failure of intelligence? Because people accusing they are accusing President Biden for rushing to bring troops out of the Afghanistan. Do you think that was a miscalculation in policy or a failure of intelligence?
No, I don't think it was a failure of intelligence. What I think it was the fact that from the very get-go, we went down the false pretense. When the September 11th happened, out of the 19 people that participated in the September the 11th, 17 of them was from Saudi Arabia. So one has to ask the question, why then does the United States take it out on Afghanistan rather than on Saudi Arabia? After all, bin Laden was from even Saudi Arabia. But if you look at the history of what happened in Afghanistan, it becomes quite clear that the media told us one thing when actually what was going on was something completely different. When the United States left out of the Vietnam War, they moved in the direction of Afghanistan because, in fact, the king of Afghanistan was overthrown. And as he was overthrown, there was a new government that came into Afghanistan that actually did the same things that the United States claimed it wanted to do. Only this government was doing it. And what was the United States response to it? Oh, we got to get rid of this government. So what they did was they cut a deal with the warlords, the people who ended up becoming the very people they claim that they're against right now. They cut a deal with them to start attacking the new inside of Afghanistan. And by attacking this new government, that they would allow the U.S. corporations to have access to the raw materials in Afghanistan, which is estimated to be between $6 and $7 trillion. But what happened was that the warlords that made up a lot of the Taliban we have today, they only were interested in getting back their. And so once they won their turf, they stopped fighting. And the United States didn't want them to stop fighting. They wanted them to keep fighting until they replaced the new government. And what they didn't, what most people here don't know, was that new government was a government that allowed girls and women to go to school. It all the claims that the United States said it wanted to do for Afghanistan, that government was doing. And the United States was totally against it because the multinational corporations wanted access to the cheap, to the very expensive raw materials inside of Afghanistan. And so we took a different track and sided with the very people that we claim we're against today. Then what happened was, as they were able to overthrow that government, and even defeat the Soviet troops that was giving assistance to that government, United States celebrated. From now, you got bin Laden there, you have all these foreign people there because the United States recruited them there because since the warlords were only interested in their turfs, they wanted people that were ideologically driven.
Pause for that. Keep your talk. Let me get back to this gentleman, Mr. Mbala, and thank you for waiting patiently. Mr. Paul threw a lot of information right there. Talk about the deal. Mr. Trump did have a deal with the Taliban, and part of the deal was that you know what, he would withdraw the troops, but the Taliban should never attack the U.S. personnel and everybody involved with the United States on the ground. Now, today, I don't know if the Taliban respect that deal, but it seems to me that Mr. Biden is just continuing that policy of trying to withdraw and his argument is if we've been there 20 years and nothing happened, even if we stay another 20 years, it's going to be absolutely the same. And we didn't go over there for nation building. We went over there so that we can reestablish some kind of a democracy or something like that. And mainly because there was somebody called Osama bin Laden that was hiding in those mountains in Afghanistan. So my question to you is this, my friend. Now that the Taliban, now that Kabul is under the Taliban control, and Mr. Biden probably sent some 5,000 troops to control the airport. You saw the chaos on TV. How the airport was really chaos there. What are your thoughts? Because this is too much on you, I know. But just give me your thought on what
I
can
think this is
possibly
Wild West, Afghanistan style. I believe that the Taliban, we all know the history of the Taliban. I believe, and when you're juxtaposing the negotiating abilities of Donald Trump versus the negotiation abilities of Joe Biden, I will take the negotiation abilities of Joe Biden every day of the week. That being said, I was disappointed when the president of Afghanistan fled. I understand that people in positions of power are afraid for their lives, and I bet you when he fled, he probably had a few pennies with him all along the way. With that being said, Afghanistan is one of those areas of the world that seems to have been in conflict since even before Jesus Christ. And so I think that all you can do is worry about incrementalism. What can you do? 20 years of blood and treasure. Think of that. And I think that President Biden was doing his best to reach a benchmark, September 11th, and all the symbolism that comes with that. But I think there may have been a miscalculation, and obviously there was, to where now it seems to have imploded. And right now you're trying to put back Humpty Dumpty with all of the splatter of the yolk and the eggshells, and you're realizing that, wow, in front of the world, we're going to put back this egg on our face. And you can do it as long as you're straight with the people and let them know that you've made a mistake. Politicians seem to have this aversion to thinking that everything they do is right. That it's okay to say I made a mistake. I'm course correcting in the best interest of our country, whether it's Haiti, the United States, Equatorial Guinea, or Gabon. And we're from there. There's no weakness in making an error in judgment. I know that President Biden has, and I know many people around President Biden who are competent public servants who don't want Afghanistan to implode. Who wants failure in any equation? But the thing about politics and how things can change on the ground, who would have thought that after 20 years, in a matter of days, the Taliban would have their feet on the president's desk, smoking their cigars, kind of like what happened on January 6th here in the United States of America, even though some people believe that didn't happen.
Listen, Paul, you mentioned something about Russia and the defeat, because the Russians went to Afghanistan and they were defeated, and you say America was laughing. Did we learn about the mistakes of others? Look at the history and know exactly that is not a place that you just go and just have some kind of military victory just like that. Your thought on that?
Well, first thing you have to keep in mind again, over this past 20 years, we spent over $2.3 trillion in dealing with Afghanistan. This is money that could have lowered college tuitions in this country. This is money that could have made for more affordable housing in this country. This is money that could have been rebuilding the school systems, the public school systems in the urban centers of this country. This is our tax dollars that were spent. That doesn't even count for the amount of people who lost their lives, lost their limbs, lost their arms, lost their minds, lost their legs. You know,
The incredible stuff. I mean, the incredible
I mean,
sacrifice.
we clearly, as a people in this country, spent a lot of our resources. Our government officials spent a lot of our resources. And they also did an outstanding job of lying to us, because there's no way you can have our government tell us how great our intelligence is in this country, and tell us that it will be at least 4 to 6 months before the Taliban will take over Kabul, and 9 days later, they're sitting in the presidential seat of the palace smoking their cigars. I mean, either you're lying to us or you're telling us that your intelligence isn't worth a hill of beans. I mean, you can't have it both ways.
So are you saying this is a failure of intelligence, or just a
No, I'm saying
miscalculation
it
of
was a
policy?
failure of purpose. In other words, the purpose that they told us they were there for was not the purpose that they were there for. If they really built the communities and helped their country meet the needs of the people in those communities, and trust me, with as small as their population is, $2.3 trillion could have gone a long way in improving people's lives, and in which people would have trusted the government that the United States kept sponsoring while they were there. But it was clear that not even their own armed forces were believing in that government and believed that they was worth their while to fight for their government, or they wouldn't have taken their uniforms off and ran. So we've been told a real line of, for the last 20 years, we've been told misinformation after misinformation after misinformation about what's going on in that country. And
so what happened? You think this is a result of not us? And then let me. I'll come back to you, Mr. Paul, for a second to clarify that. But I want to throw this question again for both of you. You think the Taliban could have done this by themselves, no, with no help?
You asking me?
I think that the Taliban are like any other force, have people who have capacities that people often underestimate. You know, it's amazing. And when I hear Paul talk about the theme that keeps coming back to me is when they talk about the government waste, fraud, and abuse. You can check all of those boxes when talking about the waste, the fraud, and abuse perpetrated upon the American people for the last 20 years. And I hope that history will not repeat itself, and that we know that whenever you go into battle, you put people's children into harm's way, there's always some shenanigans, some finessing of the storyline. But anything in the dark, even the dark nights of Kabul, one day come to light, the facts.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's clear what happened there. We've been sold a bill of goods, so to certain contractors to fill their pockets, and they did. In fact, there are a number of reports, for example, where they had contractors who were supposed to set up showers for the soldiers, and they did the wiring in such a way that people actually lost their lives. Electrocuted in their showers because there was faulty electrical work being done without tax dollars.
And were those people held accountable? Were they held accountable for those deaths of Americans who trusted? I mean, when you take a shower, right, when you're in those facilities, the last thing you think is that something tragic that would happen. But that story was underplayed, but I do remember that. And it just shows you how, for some reason, some people get away with murder literally, while others end up going to prison.
Well, this is my last question to both of you guys, and I want the straight answers. Do you think that this situation could have been avoided? You know that whatever the United States was, because Paul situation was that, okay, from the start, we were, misled. They didn't tell the truth to the American people, or maybe to the purpose, the reason why they were there in that part of the world. Now, what happened is so awful to see, the sacrifice of our service member on the floor, the people that work with America to help this country back on track. And when you see these people, they're, playing, just to get on the plane to go somewhere to flee the country. Now, do you think this situation could have been handled differently? I'll start with you, Gustavo.
I think that the American people were sold a bill of goods because the emotionalism of September 11th, and I think that if people were told that Martians were responsible for September 11th, that they would have sent people to Mars. And it's unfortunate that during that time, a lot of people were willing to listen to the president. And I salute President Bush for his response. But I think that
President Biden?
Biden, yeah, under his response. But I believe now that it's a time to rebuild, refocus, and repurpose, and hope that we've learned something from this tragic mistake. $2.2 trillion later, and God knows how many other American lives lost in that process.
Excellent. Let me throw the same question to my friend Paul. Paul, do you think we could have done this differently? With seeing what's going on, and maybe get a different outcome. What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, of course it could have been done differently, but you have to remember that the rules behind the game of how the United States make their decisions are often made about what they can put money into certain corporate pockets. As long as their decision-making process is focused on how much profit that can be made by certain corporations in this country and not on the human needs of humanity in this country and around this world, we will continue to have this type of problem happen. Just like we had it happen to us in Vietnam, we had it happen to us in South Korea, we had it happen to us in Afghanistan, we've had it happen to us in Iraq. I mean, it will continue to happen this way because our priorities in this country is wrong. Our priorities in this country is about greed. And as long as it's about greed and not about humanity, you will constantly have these inhumane acts done with our tax dollars.
To whom much is given, much is required. I hope that the United States will require better of itself. Not that we're anti-American, but we can do better. We know better. And I look forward to rolling up my sleeves and helping in that regard anywhere in the world.
Absolutely, guys. We're going to leave right there. It was an amazing conversation with you guys, gentlemen, as always. Paul Pomfrey, Gustavo and Vela, two of the greatest gentlemen in our community. I appreciate your insight.
Listen, guys. Support GAN TV. We need them. We need Malik out there. Support them, guys.
Absolutely, absolutely. Listen, this is not the last time you're gonna see these two gentlemen. I want to thank you both for coming, and I look forward for you to come back and to trying to give people some insight, some other side of the story that most people usually don't hear. So again, thank you, guys, Paul and Gustavo. I look forward to speaking with you.
Yeah. Thank you both.
Okay. All right. So thank you guys for watching us. You are on GAN TV. This is a Global Affairs Network TV. Our job here is to try and help other people to listen to another side of the history and another side of what's going on in the world. So please make sure that you tune in every day at this particular time. And if you have a question, do not hesitate to send us to your question. And we will look forward to, bring some other people on the scenes to give some answers to your questions. Again, thank you so much for listening. And I look forward for this gentleman to come back again to give us some perspective on what's going on in the world.